please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Hey, DFS fans, we haven't forgotten about you. AJ and I, Paul, Bruno, the Statsman, are back with you in your daily fantasy sports picks with our thoughts ahead of tonight's schedule. And there was a late breaking bit of news this morning in terms of a schedule cancellation. So we're going to ignore the Nashville-Dallas game. And that means a shorter list of games to look at. AJ, what's your biggest attraction in terms of tonight's schedule of action?
Yeah, so I think for me, I always like to look at the odds and try and pick players on heavily favored teams. I think that's kind of the best starting point when you're trying to figure that out. Now, obviously, the Stars were about minus 160, 165 tonight against the Predators. They were the biggest favorites, but with that game being called off, I had to kind of shuffle around and look elsewhere. And really, the biggest thing I'm noticing is that the only game with an over-under above 5.5 is the Capitals Penguins game. So I'm going to use 4 guys from that game on both sides of the lineup and both first line combos. So I'm going to start with Nick Baxtrom. He will be 6,700 on DraftKings tonight, and I'll use him paired up. As much as I hate myself for doing this as a Penguins fan, I'm going to pair him up with Tom Wilson. Wilson's only 4,900. So he's cost controlled. He's been really productive. And look, these teams don't really care for each other, and they're both be amped up. On the other side of the matchup, I'm going to use Sidney Crosby at 6,400 and Brian Rust at 6,600. Rust has been arguably the best player for the Penguins all season long. He's the one guy that, continually just shoots the puck constantly. He's worked his way into the number 1 power play unit. So he works, really well for me there. In terms of the biggest favorite with that one game off the board, you have to look at the New York Rangers, who are currently sitting about minus 140 favorites against a New Jersey team that hasn't played in a couple weeks. So I'm picking a number of players from that team. And it starts with their young wingers who are set to play on the same line with Artemi Panarin out. And that's Capo Caco at 3,200 and Alexis Lafreniere at 3,000. Really a steal to get those 2 caliber players for a combined 6,200 on DraftKings tonight. I'll continue on defense with Adam Fox at 5,700. He's their top power play quarterback. The one guy not coming from the Rangers or the Washington-Pittsburgh matchup that I have tonight is Devin Taves at 5,300 for Colorado. He's a top power play guy for them as well, gets opportunities to play with their real stars. And then between the nets, I do go back to the Rangers and use Igor Shesterkin tonight. With the other game being canceled, he is the most expensive netminder on the board tonight. But 8,200, I think I could build up a decent enough lineup the rest of the way to get him in there. So that's how things shook out for me on DraftKings. Paul, what about you over on Fanduel?
Well, I heard what you said about the Washington Capitals, and I dismissed it, AJ, because I think you were speaking it from your heart instead of your head a little bit. Let me just take a shot that way, because you got a couple of shots against me with the Maple Leafs struggles last night, an epic loss that I'm trying to forget here, and I might be driven to a couple of cans of some liquid beverage after this show to try and help me forget that. But in any case, I got a bit of a grab bag. I kind of did a bit of a stack with Washington, a mini stack with Vegas in their matchup because Colorado's got issues with the COVID and in a matchup that's a key one for both clubs. I think the home side will be amped up to take advantage of a rather limited Colorado team. And then I'm throwing in off the top Jack Eichel for the Sabres. He's finally going to get a chance to play. I think he's going to be excited to finally hit the ice again. And I think the price point is pretty cheap when you consider it's $7,600 for one of the top players in the game. But maybe it's mitigated by the fact that the Islanders play such a great defensive structure. Sabres do have home ice, though, and I'm expecting that they're going to do what they can to keep him away from the top checkers of the opposition so he can have a big night on the home pond. Nicholas Baxtrom is my other center. Of course, I had to keep an eye on who's playing with Ovechkin these days, and it looks like Baxtrom gets the nod, and I find that a cheap value at $6,500 to have that situation in place offensively at the center position. Then on the wing, I start with the two Vegas wingers on the top line. In fact, all my forwards are first-line players. Pacioretty and Stone both make my lineup at $7,800 and $7,500 respectively. They're both off to great offensive starts, and I think that they have an edge over that weekend Colorado team tonight as well. In terms of the defensive structure of this lineup, Matt Dunba and Justin Schultz, both top players in that regard for their respective clubs. Schultz, a bit of a surprise, though, with the fact that he's contributing almost a point a game pace over the last 8 or 9 games that he's played. Matt Dunba, always a linchpin of the offense from Minnesota on the back end, and a power play, averaging almost 11 points in DFS value play on a nightly basis, and only $4,000 for him, only $4,200 for Schultz, keeping with my trend to keep my costs low on the defense. And then I round out the squad with Joel Erickson Eck, who gets a bit of a soft touch playing in Los Angeles tonight. He's off to a good start with 9 points in the early season in 11 games played. $5,100 for a guy who's a top line forward. I'll do that every chance I get. And then Tom Wilson, the league's unicorn, as I call him. If he's good enough for you, AJ, he's certainly good enough for me in this matchup. And then I agree with you in terms of the goalie pick. We're looking at the fact that New Jersey, not one of the more potent offenses in the league, and the Rangers can play a bit of a solid defensive game. And I think Shesterkin's been a solid player for them all season long. So I'll take that $7,300 value and hope that I hit in the winner's circle, as you expect to do as well. AJ, that wraps up another week of looking at the things around the NHL. Do you have any final thoughts before we go off the air?
No, I mean, it's we haven't, fingers crossed, the COVID cancellations have dipped off from last week. So that seems to be trending in the right direction. And, it's always a hassle when you're building lineups and then games get canceled. So, hopefully we can have just a regular schedule action going forward.
I'd love that too, partner. We wish all our listeners good luck with your picks. Join us again next Tuesday for the following episode of Puckcast with Statsman and AJ. Don't forget to look for us on YouTube at RotoWire Hockey. So long, everybody.
Please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.